The New York class was the US Navy's first shot at a super dreadnought, and the intermediate step between their 12-inch gun dreadnoughts and the start of the standard-type battleships. Work on the ships technically started in 1908 as the US Navy considered proposals for what were then called Battleship 1910 and Battleship 1911. It was rumoured at the time that the Royal Navy was going to move from 12-inch to 13.5-inch guns on their new battleships, and the Kaiserliche Marine, perhaps more commonly known as the High Seas Fleet, was supposed to be going from 11-inch to 12-inch guns. Consideration was therefore given to moving to a bigger gun as well, the 14-inch. But the fact that the US didn't actually have a 14-inch gun at the time, as well as the delays waiting for it would involve, combined with the belief that battle ranges wouldn't exceed about 8,000 yards, meant that Battleship 1910 would become the Wyoming class, which was simply fitted with more and better 12-inch guns than previous classes. But by the end of 1909 it was clear that the upgunning of new ships in other navies was not just a rumour, and moreover, in early 1910, tests of the new 14-inch gun were undertaken and proved to be quite successful. An analysis of 2 rejected ideas for Battleship 1910 showed that a ship with 8 such guns would not offer much, if anything, in the way of an overall firepower advantage, but a ship with 10 guns would offer substantially more hitting power than the Wyoming's design. And so this design was selected for further development. This would, however, make the ships larger than the Wyoming's and considerably larger than any preceding ships, which led to an effort by politicians to reduce their size and scope. The US Navy pointed out that it was fairly unlikely that every other navy would respect American political wishes and likewise reduce their own ships in size, and so the design was allowed to proceed. With a displacement of around 27,000 tons, the ships would carry their 10 14-inch guns in 5 twin turrets, a pair superfiring forward and 3 aft, with a gap between the first of these and the aftmost 2, with the middle turret superfiring over the last. The gap was due to the need to position the first turret as close to the ship's centre as possible so as to prevent undue hull strain. There were also 21 single 5-inch guns in hull-mounted casemates and a couple of 3-inch anti-aircraft guns in possibly the single worst positions an anti-aircraft gun was ever mounted on, namely on small platforms stuck atop cranes, which took quite a while to get to or indeed from, and which subjected the crews to extremely violent blast effects which were capable of throwing them around the platform when the aft guns fired anywhere near them. 4 underwater torpedo tubes, 2 per side, completed the initial ship's firepower. Armour was of the distributed type, with a maximum 12-inch thickness on the main belt, although even as the final designs were being drawn up, the new all-or-nothing scheme was being developed for the succeeding Nevada class. The ships were designed for 21 knots using 2 screws. Initially, it was thought that 32,000 shaft horsepower would be needed for turbine propulsion, but as it turned out, a final generation vertical triple expansion engine allowed the ships to use just over 28,000 shaft horsepower for the same effect. So they went with that power plant instead, albeit that this particular choice of power plant would cause endless headaches about a decade or so down the line. They would also represent the old guard in another fashion, being the last coal-powered US battleships. The 2 ships, USS New York and USS Texas, were laid down in 1911, launched in 1912, and commissioned into the fleet in 1914. As the US would not formally be involved in World War I until 1917, the ship's first few years were spent assisting US operations around Veracruz before taking up patrol duties in the Atlantic. With the US entering the war, the ships were the most powerful that could be easily fuelled in the UK, which needed to retain as much oil as possible for its own forces, and so both vessels would be part of the 6th Battle Squadron of the Grand Fleet, with New York possibly running over a U-boat by accident during this period. With the Washington Naval Treaty, both ships would be retained, but due to being considerably behind the technological curve compared to the standard battleships, they went in for significant refits in the mid-1920s. This disposed of the torpedoes, increased the anti-aircraft armament, and deleted the horrific placement of the original armament, and moved some of the secondary guns higher up in the ship, the worst of them having already been removed in 1918, leaving the ship with 16 secondary guns. The ships were also converted to use oil fuel, and the old boilers replaced by fewer but more powerful ones. The two funnels were replaced by one larger funnel, and the cage masts were replaced by tripod masts, with the aft mast now sitting in the space between the first and second of the aft turrets. New fire control systems, provision for aircraft launching, and torpedo bulges were also added, which made the ships significantly more capable overall, although somewhat prone to rolling. Toward the end of the 1930s, additional light anti-aircraft weaponry was added, and in 1942 almost all the secondary battery was removed to provide the ship with an extensive suite of 3-inch, 40mm and 20mm anti-aircraft guns, with a total of 92 barrels. Both ships would spend much of their World War II career in the Atlantic, first on convoy escort duty and then later supporting various Allied landings. New York as part of Operation Torch, and Texas famously as part of Operation Overlord, the D-Day landings. Both ships would be transferred to the Pacific later on as the naval element of the war in Europe wound down, and would take part in the landings on Okinawa and Iwo Jima. The post-war fates of the ships would be somewhat different though. New York was used as one of the targets of the Operation Crossroads atomic bomb tests, and then sunk as a target in a gunfire and air assault exercise in 1948. Meanwhile, Texas would manage to get herself a berth as a museum ship, where she remains to this day, with current efforts being made to patch up her badly corroded hull and get her to a dockyard for a much-needed refit prior to a permanent home being found for her.
That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship to review, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to comment on the pinned post for dry dock questions.